Black Myth Wukong. A lot of people very excited for it. Launches tomorrow / this afternoon. Depends on where you are. It's getting a lot of people really excited. But one of the things that freaked people out is that there were no PlayStation 5 codes sent to media for review. It's a little weird, is it not? A little strange, especially when the PC port reviewers are reporting that there's a lot of technical problems. It's crashing. It's having issues with stable frame rates. There's all sorts of weird stuff going on with it. And typically publishers will send out the best platform that they have first. So if their game is super optimized for PlayStation, they will prioritize PlayStation codes to reviewers in the same way that if it's prioritized or it's built around PC performance, they'll send that out. They still usually will still send out codes for the other platforms. In my experience, the only times I can think of where I requested like PC and a console code and I was only given one was when the other platform ended up performing really, really badly at launch. So for example, like with Cyberpunk, they were willing to send out PC codes to reviewers, but if you requested a PlayStation code or an Xbox code, all of a sudden they lost your email. It's really weird. Happened to a lot of content creators. So this can sometimes be a big red flag when they send out only one platform and that platform performs poorly, because it makes you wonder, if this is the better platform, how bad is the other one? You know, like if this is the best you've got, you know. But Digital Foundry did a little clip where they talked about this, and they will know much better than I what to look for in this PS5 footage. Let's just see briefly what they have to say about the Black Myth Wukong PlayStation 5 version.
Okay, so first news topic of the week. Last week, Game Science, the developers of Black Myth Wukong, released a benchmarking tool for PC that enabled PC users to get to grips with the rendering load of the game, to give some expectation level of what they could expect the game to run at on their hardware. Now, this is Future Rich talking here, because in this segment, I actually used our Frankenstein's PC to try to emulate the kind of performance we could expect to see on PlayStation 5, because thus far, we haven't actually seen anything on PlayStation 5, which is a bit of a way. We'll talk about...
We will look at some footage that dropped. We have actually gotten some clips of that footage, but what he's showing here first is a sort of PS5 simulator with like roughly the same power level, or pretty close to the same power level. So it should tell you roughly how the game should be able to run on that hardware.
About that in the segment. However, 24 hours after we recorded this direct, IGN China actually put out...
I'm sorry, he said China like Trump. China.
After we recorded this direct, IGN China actually put out about a minute worth of gameplay, boss gameplay from the PlayStation 5 version of the game.
Yeah, he's got it.
And it raises a lot of more questions than I was expecting, because the capture quality here isn't great at all. We can give you no idea of the kind of image quality you can expect to see from the PlayStation 5 version of the game, because the quality of this footage is exceptionally poor, I would say, even though it's actually a 4K asset seemingly. And yeah, performance-wise, it does seem to be targeting 60 frames per second. We'll talk about that with my Frankenstein's PC tests in the actual recording segment. But there do appear to be some performance drops on heavy alpha effects. That's par for the course, really. But I guess at least Game Science is targeting 60 FPS. There does seem to be a 60F performance mode, but we don't know anything beyond that. I'm going to raise a couple of concerns that I have with the footage based on the IGN China captures here. Image quality is poor. Is this because of the poor quality of the capture? Is it because of YouTube compression? We just don't know, right? I mean, what I can say is there's a lot of compression in there. It doesn't look great. However...
Yeah, and it's the question, is it bad just because they're using a low bit rate, which... Let's just be honest. IGN has not had a great track record when it comes to capturing footage. Like, I don't know what they're doing over there, but they are an entertainment, like, media company, and they so regularly have god-awful capture in their reviews and their preview footage. It really makes you wonder what they're doing over there. Like, they should be way more capable than that. Like, that's ridiculous. And granted, IGN's huge, but even IGN US, even the American side of IGN has had this issue for like a year straight, where they just put up all this footage and it's just blurry and overly compressed. And I don't know if it's that their captures are wrong and they're setting that up wrong, or if it's that their exporting settings company wide for their editors are screwed up. I don't know what it is, but they're really, really bad at like the one thing they're supposed to be good at, which is showcasing and getting people excited for games.
There's some oddities in this footage. And I do think that there is a case that AMD FSR3 frame generation may be in use in this particular clip, whether it's an option in the game or not in PlayStation 5. I just don't know at this point. We've literally just been given a minute of footage with no context, but you can see if you kind of go slow-mo on the footage here, that there's a kind of strobing effect. Typically, you do see that with frame generation. There are other artifacts as well to bear in mind. When you have a particularly fast pan, you can see on the edges of the screen that there's like a border of,
yeah, look at that.
Well, it's difficult to describe really, but it just doesn't really look right. It would present similarly as another kind of strobing effect. I think the one thing that does make me think that it isn't about the quality of the capture, but could be FSR3 frame generation, is that when you look at particles, frame by frame, you can see that you have a fully formed particle and then two ghosting particles, fully formed particles, ghosting particles in a strobe again. And this is classic frame generation behavior.
Dude, it just is so crazy to me that in the year of our Lord and Savior Todd Howard 2024, we are relying on frame generation to get games running properly on these cutting edge consoles. Like, I can appreciate that the game looks really good. Black Myth Wukong looks really, really good. But I have to wonder, like, at what point do we put a little bit of the blame on devs for not optimizing? I'm not a game dev. I'm not a coder. I don't know how the graphics pipelines work. I don't know how easy it is to optimize, quote unquote, in Unreal Engine 5. But I just think as consumers, we should be able to expect a bit more than like crazy levels of artifacting from upscaling. And then also tons of issues with like frame generation. And even then it's running in like the 40 to 50 frame range, depending on when you are at in the fight. Like if the PS5 were rendering this natively, it probably would be in like the teens, which is insane.
So, we're going to go into the segment now, but you can see that, yes, there is a performance mode. We've got some metrics for you here based on the footage. Now, you might say the footage is poor quality, so how can we analyze it? The answer is by eye. I literally went through 4,500 frames, manually tagging the ones that were duplicate frames to give you this analysis. So based on the quality of the footage, even with the poor quality, I'm reasonably sure that this footage is accurate based on the clip that was presented anyway. And yeah, the image quality concerns, I think we're just going to have to wait and see and look at the final game, which, it's a couple of days away as I record this, but it doesn't really tie in with the quality of the results I was able to get from the Frankenstein's PCs. So
Frankenstein!
Very, very interesting. But anyway, on with the original segment. Okay, so next week, I think it's August the 20th, we'll see the release of the eagerly awaited Black Myth Wukong, and seemingly out of nowhere, a benchmark tool dropped on Steam, which enables you to basically access one single scene from the game, basically a scripted flyby over a stream through a sort of forest environment, and it essentially tells you what kind of performance you should be expecting to see from the game. And yeah, it's basically quite enigmatic, I'd say. I'm not even sure it's actually a stress test as such. I mean, it seems like a fairly leisurely sort of wind down a forest stream. That's it. But you do.
It does seem weird that their benchmark is like not featuring a lot of crazy particle effects or bosses swinging around. Like, you think if they were really trying to simulate CPU loads and all that they would really push it, but it is just like
to see stuff like the full
trip through a forest.
I'm going to take point on this one because There's something else that's emerged, which is that it doesn't look as though we're going to be seeing the game on PlayStation 5 until launch.
Oh,
And yeah, I mean, that's slightly problematic because, well, it could well just be the case that it needs final polish and that'll arrive in the day one patch and they don't want reviewers to see it before then. But equally, whenever this happens, there's always question marks raised over game performance, which isn't particularly great, right? Okay, so what we're doing here is essentially very similar to what I did for Oliver's work on the Space Marine preview, which was basically to take our Frankenstein's PC, as Alex likes to pronounce it, which is essentially the Xbox Series X CPU running Windows, paired with AMD's RX 6700, which is the closest GPU counterpart in the PC space to the PlayStation 5's GPU. And yeah, interesting stuff here, because obviously we've not seen anything yet from Black Myth Wukong on PlayStation 5, as far as I know. And well, let's take a look. First of all, because my computer was set to 4K resolution, it's defaulted to 4K within Black Myth Wukong's benchmark. And I pressed the recommend settings button, which just seemed to be high across the board, with FSR upscaling set to 50%. So 1080p going to 4K.
Again, it's just, I know I'm spoiled. I know, I get it. 2024 and consoles are rendering at 1080p.
But I actually decided to move to TSR because I believe that TSR quality overall is better than FSR. Actually, I'm going to segue a bit here to 4K 30 comparison with both on balanced mode, FSR and TSR. I do think that the FSR version is not quite as good as TSR, particularly in terms of particles. There's a lot of ghosting going on there. Vegetation, kind of strange. It's typically a nightmare scenario for FSR2 there. It's not great, but then again, it's not particularly fast movement, not a lot of disocclusion going on. So
I'm just a hater when it comes to FSR2, man. Like, I just really, it drives me crazy. It's just not anywhere near as good as DLSS. And I know obviously like these are AMD chips, and so like they can't just use DLSS. I totally get that, but I am frustrated that that's the best you have to offer on the console side of things.
arguably, it's giving FSR
Translate the nerd speak. I mean, they'll do it better than I will, but basically it's just FSR is one upscaler. So when they say that they have it set to 4K, the output is going to be 4K resolution. High are the settings. FSR is the upscaler they're using versus TSR. FSR is the AMD one that's used typically on consoles. That's the one that he alluded to earlier was being used potentially in the frame generation and stuff that he saw in that PS or in that IGN China footage. So effectively, when it's at 50%, you can set the upscalers to a certain percentage rate. So if you have 4K at 50%, it is rendering 50% of the frame. So it's rendering at 1080p, a quarter of the resolution. And then it's upscaling it all the way up to 4K, adding in as much detail as it can and avoiding artifacts. My problem with FSR is that below like 80% or 90%, it does a really bad job of maintaining image integrity. You start to have all sorts of distortion and ghosting and artifacting. It just really, really breaks down. And it sounds like they are suggesting to rely on FSR at 50%, which is that's crazy. Kevin, thank you for the 20, very generous. You would think that the fact we spend $500 on next gen consoles and an additional $70 on a game that we should get better results. Yes, some games are gorgeous, but i.e. Cyberpunk 2077, but others like Dragon's Dogma 2 are not. Love your content. Thank you very much for the super chat. And I mean, I think people have kind of lost sight of the fact that like as customers and as the consumer, we get to choose what we demand. Like the reason all these games are pushing for 60 is because we as the customers started demanding 60 frames and we wanted that. And that's why performance mode is so necessary nowadays. Last generation, it was much more normal for games to launch at 30. Much more normal. Now you hear a game launches on console locked at 30 and you're like, I mean, we saw it with Starfield. People lost their minds. People were like, oh, trash. My problem is not that 30 frames is necessarily bad. Obviously, most of the best games of all time launched at 30 on consoles. My problem is that, like, in the specific instances, like with Starfield being primarily a first-person shooter, 30 frames for me, I just can't do. It makes me motion sick. But in the case of like Black Myth, this game absolutely could run at 30, be beautiful, and still be an awesome action game. Other amazing games that ran at 30, like Bloodborne. People love Bloodborne, and that's a game that's locked at 30, often dropping below that. And so you can have an amazing game that goes below 30, but it just seems like since the PS5 and Xbox Series consoles launched, that's been the standard. People have demanded 60 frames. That's where they wanted the leap, because they felt like the graphical leap wasn't there. People are like, yeah, the games look kind of the same, maybe a little bit sharper at 4K, but we're not really getting a huge leap forward in terms of performance. So let's demand 60 frames. And how they've gotten there is with all this upscaling stuff. So they render the frame at 1080p and then upscale it, which is faster than just rendering the whole frame at 4K. So they can get better frame times out of it and stuff like that for better frame rates. But to me, it's still very, very frustrating that it's 2024. People have spent $500 on a big console that's supposed to be cutting edge, and we're rendering at like 2011 resolutions, like not 2011, like 2014 resolutions. Even the Xbox One technically rendered at like 900p most of the time, but the PS4 was primarily 1080p. So I get it. Upscalers allow for you to do amazing things you couldn't have done before, but still it's really frustrating. Knock, thank you for the 250. I want to get Wukong. Does that make sense? I think, do you mean like you're seeing all the excitement and hype around it and you want to feel that too? And that's what you mean? I could see that. There's some games where like I want to be hyped for it too. I hear people just get so crazy excited for some stuff and I'm like, I just don't get it. Like, you remember when Deathloop was announced? People were so freaking excited for Deathloop because all the reviews were perfect 10 out of 10s. And I was like, I just don't get it. I just don't understand it.
Pretty a more than fair shake, if you like. Anyway, let's look at the performance numbers. 41.35 FPS with performance mode. That's 1080p. Versus balanced mode, which is about 60% of 4K, 34.07 FPS. So basically, we've got a good margin for overhead. If we keep on performance mode, that overhead drastically reduces if we increase the resolution, the internal resolution that is, to balance mode. Essentially, you gain 21.3% of performance by using performance instead of balance. But of course, if there is a 30 FPS lock on a console game, nothing stopping the developer using dynamic resolution scaling. And I think it looks pretty good, I have to say. I think it looks absolutely fine.
Absolutely fine. But this is what he was alluding to at the top, where this was surprising, is that's the results that they were expecting. But what they ended up getting was this footage where there's problems with the capture. It's not a high bit rate or anything, but they are relying so heavily on upscaling and then frame generation that when the game runs into a particularly tough sequence, it really struggles. As you can see here, the primary thing that consoles seem to struggle with are alpha effects, which are basically like, you know, a PNG picture where it has transparency around it, so you can just copy and paste it into a file or a document, and it isn't just a square, it's actually tracked around the object because it can have the latency or the transparency in there. When these game engines use those alpha effects that have transparency layers, the game really starts to struggle. And this might be just the capture, but it looks to be artifacting from the upscaling. You get this weird checkerboarding pattern where the engine just isn't really, or the upscaler isn't really sure how to handle it, all these individual little particle effects. So you just get these artifacts all over the place. And this is where you can see like the capture is really bad, where from frame to frame, it's going blurry checkerboard, blurry checkerboard, blurry checkerboard. So it's really tough to figure out what exactly is what the game's supposed to look like and what is the upscaler freaking out. My expectation is that this is what the game actually renders as when it is rendering the full frame. And then this is what happens when it tries to generate the second frame, or mix that with the upscaler and the generation at the same time. So it just seems like they are relying on a lot of these little bitty tricks to boost performance. But in cases like this, you're dropping 20 frames in the middle of a boss fight, which is a lot. I mean, you're losing 30% of your frames in a super high intensity moment, and you would not hope to see that. It's just, we'll see how the public reception is tomorrow when people have actually started playing it. I hope they have a day one patch that does a lot for it, but based on what I'm seeing here, I mean, I think some people are going to get really pissy tomorrow. And if the PC issues that have been reported are as bad as they've been made out to be, and they're not fixed in a day one patch, I mean, it's going to get mass downvoted on Steam. This could be one of those big, like, 180 games where people just totally turn on it. And it's too bad, because like the game seems to be very, very good. It's just held back by these performance issues, and it's such a waste. It's the same thing that happened with Jedi Survivor, where it's like the game's really, really good, everybody loves the game, runs like crap, and so that's all anybody's going to talk about with the game when it launches. Because I mean, can you blame them? Nothing's worse than upset gamers. Yeah, no, I mean, it's there's no such rage as a gamer scorn, as they say. But I mean, I also can't blame them. If they pay $60 for a brand new game to run on their PC and it keeps crashing randomly, and they're having issues with dialogue not playing and cutscenes breaking, like, I don't blame them for being pissed about that. And if you bought the game for $60 on PlayStation, and then you're playing it like this, and it drops from 60 down to 40, then back up to 60. I mean, that was one of the reasons people got upset about Dragon's Dogma 2, is that it also had a ton of problems with performance. And I think that was also totally fair, which is why I told people, yeah, no, you can. This game is not for everybody, but if you need to wait till they polish this up, nobody's going to blame you, because it's pretty rough. So I know that this game was in the works for a very long time. I can appreciate the work that they've done on it. They ported it from Unreal Engine 4 over to Unreal Engine 5. They made a lot of improvements like that, but performance matters. And I think it's fair if gamers don't want to put up with it, because if you put your foot down, you demand better polish, you're going to get better polish. But it's only going to matter if people actually like withhold their spend. But we're going to be able to tell pretty quickly whether or not the average gamer is going to experience this, and whether or not a day one patch is going to fix it. So we're going to know pretty soon. Let's see, the Norman Conquest. Thank you for the 2. Streaming this tonight. Regardless, fingers crossed. Yeah, I mean, I hope it's really good. I hope it pops off. I hope they fix it with the day one patch, and people look at the reviews and like, what are you talking about? It runs great. I really hope that's the case. I'm particularly worried about the PS5 version, but I guess time will tell. I think for our video we're going to film tonight, I'm going to buy it on Steam and on PlayStation and test both versions, because I want to see how it runs on PS5. Because I have a feeling it's not going to go great. He took my thing.